Thanks, Greg, and hello, everybody. So yeah, just today talking to you about the recent supplementation program or research project that we did at Kidman Springs. But just to set the scene on why we did this, so we know from sales figures from the supplement companies that adoption of phosphorus supplementation in Northern Australia is much lower than what you would expect for the amount of phosphorus deficient country, which is, you can see on that map there, all the red stuff is acute and deficient in phosphorus. And that's the feedback that we also get from extension officers, and Rob Dixon, who's well-known researcher in the area of phosphorus nutrition, wrote in a paper that it appears that only a small proportion of cattle grazing phosphorus deficient pastures are getting supplemented. And so if you go to the literature, you'll find that there have been quite a few studies that have found that phosphorus supplementation increases growth, but somewhat surprisingly, there's been no published scientific study showing that dry lick phosphorus supplementation increases pregnancy rates in Northern Australia. And I'm suggesting that this could be a reason for the low adoption. So beef advisors have had to rely on estimates and assumptions when predicting the responses from phosphorus supplementation, and they're probably pretty good, but it seems that they haven't been convincing enough for many producers to go out and spend money on supplementation since we're seeing this low adoption. And I guess it's basically that the producers haven't had hard data that they can go to that shows them what sort of a response you might get in pregnancy rates and what sort of a return on investment you might get. And so that's the environment that we started this research project into, to try and provide that information to producers. So just for those that don't know anything about Kidman Springs, it's about 250 kilometres southwest of Katherine in the Victoria River District of the Northern Territory. It's for all just native pastures and about 750 mil annual rainfall. So to run through what we did, back in 2014, we took 179 weaner heifers, Brahman heifers, and we randomly allocated to either a plus P, it's a bit of a tongue twister, plus P treatment or minus P. So these treatments were exactly the same, except that their supplement either contained phosphorus or it didn't. And then they grazed in neighbouring paddocks that we'd done phosphorus testing on and found that they were P deficient. And the treatments each year in May, they would swap paddocks to try and get around any paddock effects. So we mated them for the first time at 2 years of age for 4 months from January, and then every year from January for about 4.5 months. And then we did twice a year, we mustered in May and September for data and blood sample collection. The calves were weaned at the May musters and weighed. And one point I would make is that we didn't cull any animals throughout the trial for bad performance. So this especially relates to maiden heifers. If they didn't get pregnant, we didn't cull them. We just, they stayed in the trial and got mated again the following year. So there were some heifers that didn't get pregnant for the first time till 3-year-old. So this slide here shows you what was in the licks. Basically, the licks were the same, except that the minus P lick had salt substituted for the phosphorus. So you can see over here in the dry season, both licks had 25% urea, same amount of Gran Am, but in the minus P, there's more salt, and there's 25% of Biophos, which is a Ridley product, which is a high quality phosphorus supplement, MCP. And in that 25% Biophos, it means that there was 5.25% actual phosphorus. And I just wanted to really thank publicly Ridley for their sponsorship of the project. And we weren't able to get external funding, and so getting our supplements supplied for the project made a big difference to us. Then in the wet season, obviously no phosphorus in minus P, but we've got 42.5% Biophos, which is equivalent to 9% actual P. So you can see here on this other graph you've got the intakes, and our target intake to get 9 grams of P in the wet season was 100 grams per head per day. But we never actually achieved that during the wet season. So these intakes where it goes above the line are in the dry season, and all these other ones are the wet season intake, and we never actually achieved that. And it's a bit of an important point that I'll probably touch on later, but it just to me it shows that we're probably getting some benefit from our dry season P, having P in the dry season lick. Producers always interested in what our lick cost us. So per head per year, the average supplement intake is $35, with most of that, almost $25, happening in the dry season, which is when the lick intake was higher and the dry season was longer than the wet season, which explains that. Okay, so we started out at weaning. Over that first dry season, there was no difference between treatments in growth, but then in the wet season, you can see the plus P treatment increasing there by 34 kilos more than the minus P. Over the next dry season, the two treatments grew the same, but we had another 33 kilo increase in growth in plus P, so that by the end of their second wet season, which is when they were mated for the first time, the plus P treatment was 66 kilos heavier on average. And we know that pregnancy rates are strongly influenced by the weight during mating, and so we saw a 10% higher pregnancy rate in the plus P treatment. So we, the trial ran for a period where heifers had then they grew into cows, had the opportunity to contribute to 3 calf crops. And in the first one, so this is when they lactated for the first time, you can see photos of the two treatments there, really stark differences in body condition, and the average weight of plus P, well, in first lactation heifers was 120 kilos heavier than minus P, so massive differences. Surprisingly, calf loss was the same in both treatments, but then when we get to pregnancy rates, in first lactation heifers, they were 25% higher in plus P. And just for people not familiar with first calf or first lactation heifer, fertility in Northern Australia is often quite low in Brahman heifers, and so these results are not surprising. When we look at the weight of calves, the average weight of the calves weaned from the plus treatment was 34 kilograms heavier than from minus P. And so we had more calves and heavier calves from plus P. And as a result of that, the total weight of the calves weaned from plus P was 3 tons heavier than from minus P. And when it comes to mortality rate, so this is the cumulative mortality rate from the start of the trial as weaners through to this time, it was 7% higher in minus P. And being a government research station, we are under pretty strict animal welfare guidelines, and so we thought it was necessary to take about a third of the heifers that were in really bad condition in minus P and supplementary feed them to improve their body condition. So we avoided any losses, but you know, on a commercial property and bigger paddocks, that probably wouldn't happen, and you probably would have seen higher mortality than what we saw. So this is the next year, and in this year, those photos were taken in March before the calves were weaned later on. And again, you can see big differences in body condition, quite a few ribs over here in minus P. And so this is, if cows had got back in calf in minus P, this would have been their second calf, but only 2 cows, lactating cows, did get back in calf. So all the cows having a calf this year either lost their calf and reconceived, or they didn't get pregnant as 2-year-olds for the first time, but got pregnant as 3-year-olds for the first time. So we saw a higher calf loss in minus P in this year. We saw more calves weaned in plus P because a lot more got back in calf. The average weight of the calves weaned was 13 kilograms higher in plus P. And when you factor in the more calves and heavier calves, we weaned 2.8 tons more calves from plus P. And then when you look at the reconception rates in lactating cows, much higher in plus P, so a 40% advantage, 60 compared to 20%. And the average weight of all the cows was again much heavier, close to 100 kilos heavier. So again, big differences. And when we get to the next year, when the cows had the opportunity to contribute the third calf, we saw some really huge differences. You can see there pictures of the body condition of the cows in minus P. These are cows that have now lactated for the second time. And as you probably know or heard from Mick's presentation, when through lactation, a lot of P goes out in the milk. And so these cows have really had the P drained from their system. And in fact, we decided, given their body condition, that we needed to draw the trial to a close for animal welfare reasons. So you can see there, again, massive differences in average weight between the treatments and massive differences in pregnancy rates. So 75% of the lactating cows in plus P were pregnant, compared to only 9% in minus P. So huge difference. And the other thing was mortality rates. We had another 5 minus P cows go missing. So over the whole trial, the cumulative mortality rate was 11% higher in minus P. And that's a big profit driver, mortality rate in cows. And it would have been even higher. Again, we had to, given the body condition of some of these cows, we really made an effort to look after them, and we stopped the trial. We started giving them phosphorus. We gave them molasses and protein pellets and meal to pick them up. But a lot of them in a bigger property with bigger paddocks probably would have died. Quite a few had peg leg and were too sore to actually walk to the yards and too weak. So we had to lock them in a cooler and really look after them. So just massive, you know, just to the eye, the massive differences between the treatments at this point in time. And so just making the point there, for a lot of cows in the north, phosphorus supplementation really is a matter of life and death. So this is a bit of a busy slide, but it just summarizes the differences over the years. You can see in the average weight of wet cows, really probably just focus on the red figures, but 120 kilos difference in the first year, 69 in the next year, and 108 in the third year. Pregnancy rates were 25% higher in first calf heifers, 40% higher the next year, and 66% higher the next year. We started to see differences in calf loss between the treatments in the second 2 years, and the average weight of weaners was much higher in the plus P treatment in each of the years. In fact, by the third year, 45 kilograms higher on average, so really big. And that factors in when we start to look at the profit. Oh, sorry, I did some calculations there where over the first 3 calf crops, on average, the plus P females produce 34% more weight of calves per female mated than minus P. So what that means is we could have run 66 plus P females and weaned the same amount of calves, weight of calves from them as we would have from 100 minus P females. So when we go to look at profit, what we see here is straight up front, I want to say, look, I'm not an economist. This is a very basic comparison. All I'm doing is comparing the extra value of the weaners produced by plus P to the extra cost of the supplement that they ate. So what I've done each year is I've taken the extra weight of calves weaned from the plus P treatment, multiplied it by the value of young cattle in that year to get the value of the calves, and I've divided it by the cumulative cost of the extra supplement that the plus P treatment has eaten to that point. So in the first year, there was a 280% return on investment. Now, when I say the first year, that was in the first calf crop, but that's actually about 3 years from the start of the trial to when you're weaning your calves. The next year, the profit or the advantage in return is up to 350% basically, and in the final year it was almost 500%. So these are massive return on investments, you know, way above anything you're going to get from a bank or your super fund at the moment, certainly. Sorry, and that, so just the point is there that these are for the actual treatments. If you adjust for the fact that we started out with 2 extra animals in the plus P treatment, it comes back slightly, but it's pretty much the same. Now, if you include the salvage value of the cows in these calculations to look at the actual amount of beef produced in both treatments, so that's the weight of calves plus the extra weight of cows, the figures are even more startling. So by May 2019, when we stopped, the average weight of plus P cows was 91 kilos heavier and 11% less of them had died. So we had a lot more weight of cows. So we've got our extra value of weaners and the extra value of salvage value of cows. And when we divide that by the cost of supplement, we're looking at a 766% return on investment. So what that means is for every dollar you spend on phosphorus supplement, you produce $7.66 more beef in the plus P treatment than the minus P treatment. So massive, massive difference there. So just to wrap up and say where to from here for us at Kidman Springs and the research there. One of the other reasons why we see low adoption of phosphorus supplementation is that it's very difficult to implement in some properties where access is limited in the wet season or actually impossible with flooding or boggy areas. And so we want to see if we can develop what we've called an easy P supplementation strategy. So you might remember I talked about how we had less intake of the phosphorus lick in the wet season that we were hoping for. Initially, I was really worried that we wouldn't see differences between the treatments because of that, but I'm pretty sure that we got a benefit from including phosphorus in the dry season lick. So that sort of influenced our thinking here. With this easy P method, what we want to do is include phosphorus in dry season supplement and then put out bulk phosphorus before the start of the wet season. So there's no need to put out any lick during the wet season when it's difficult. And we want to compare that to an actual wet season phosphorus supplementation program and see what sort of performance we get from the 2 treatments. And we might find that we get 80% as good performance from the easy P as we do from actual wet season supplementation program. And if so, well, that would be really still beneficial. Even if you got 80% of $7.66 for every dollar you spent on your P lick, it's still a lot of profit. And so we're really just wanting to look at whether this is going to be an easier strategy for properties where it's difficult to put out supplement in the wet season. So we'll look at doing that initial work on the research farm and then rolling it out onto commercial properties and producer demonstration sites. I'm not quite sure how I'm going for time there, Greg, but just this is the last bit. So just this work really builds on the fact that we know that cows can store phosphorus in their bones and tissues when it's in excess in their diet and then mobilize it when they need it, say during lactation or when P becomes limiting or deficient. And so what we're trying to do here is build up the stores during the dry season or replenish the stores that they've depleted during lactation the previous years. And that sort of, I've already discussed, I guess, how that builds on what we saw with the supplement intakes not achieving in the wet season, what we were hoping to see these differences between treatments. So we're pretty sure we were getting some benefit from dry season supplement. So look, I'll just wind up there. Just want to acknowledge our department for funding this work. I think it's pretty critical work and glad that we're able to do it. Again, Ridley for sponsoring the LIC and my colleague Kieran McCosker with the statistical analysis and of course the staff on the research station.